Hi there, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome back to the gratuitous Rainbow Spectrum, and welcome back to 16-bit Brawl, where we are taking two Super Nintendo and Genesis games, we pit them against each other to see which one is the better one, and today we've got a doozy. We've got Mortal Kombat. Yes, that's right, the original Mortal Kombat, Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. Which game is actually the better game? Well, we know one sold a lot better than the other, and we know one has a terrible reputation, but that was a long time ago. If we go in and play these games today, which one is actually the better game? Let's find out. It's time for a 16-bit Brawl.
The Super NES struck a pretty significant blow in their war against the Sega Genesis with their exclusive release of Street Fighter II. Launching in the US in July 1992, it would be another year before the king of arcade fighting games landed on Sega Genesis, which I'm sure will be a topic of conversation in a future installment of this very series, but we're here to talk about how Sega struck back. Mortal Kombat quickly became an absolute arcade phenomenon thanks to its amazing visuals, creative characters, and of course, over-the-top violence. Home console ports were inevitable, and unlike Street Fighter, these would be landing on every platform imaginable on the very same day, Mortal Monday. The stage was set for both 16-bit versions of this game to release on equal footing. That is until Nintendo decided to shoot themselves in the pants by censoring the ever-loving heck out of this game. This caused the Genesis version to outsell its Super NES counterpart by a considerable margin. But was it in fact a better game? I remember loving my Super NES version despite the lack of blood, and absolutely hating the Genesis version when I played it at a friend's house. But not having touched either version in decades, I've decided to dust them both off and pit them against one another side by side to determine which version is actually better. Let's get started. Typically, we'd compare both games in a general sense, but that's honestly a bit silly here. They're both Mortal Kombat, same fighters, same moves, more or less, same basic game. So let's get down to brass tacks. This one really is a clear win for the Super NES. Yes, the Genesis version has blood if you enter the code, but in nearly every other respect, the Super NES absolutely trounces the Genesis in terms of visuals. The most obvious stuff can be seen from screenshots alone, but here in video, it's clear as day. The colors in the Genesis version just aren't there. Everything lacks detail, and there are some wacky color issues like a bunch of red bits on the characters for no reasons. Fighters animate extremely poorly too. They're missing a ton of frames, and Sub-Zero even has the same stance as Scorpion. Backgrounds took a big hit with tons of missing details and animations like Shang Tsung clapping after matches end. Everyone's too small as well. That's not to say the Super NES game is perfect in terms of visuals. The lack of blood is a really big hit when it comes to the game's overall character, and the stages have this weird lack of verticality with the ground set way too high off the bottom of the screen. But other than that, this game's a really nice looking port. It matches the arcade original extremely well, and has just about all the animations, it has a nice presentation, lots of background movement, the whole shebang. If it weren't for the censorship, this would truly be a top-notch port. Even so, Super NES still wins by a country mile. The point goes to Super Nintendo. Now this is a complicated category. First, let's talk music. The Super NES game does an excellent job of recreating the arcade game's score. It is pretty muffled, but all in all it's a very close approximation. The Genesis game couldn't really emulate the arcade music, so it did its own thing, and it's honestly pretty great. They're the same tunes, but they're redone in a way that really plays to the Genesis system's strengths. They've got a great energy to them, and they're super crisp. So on one hand, we have the Super NES being far more faithful to the source material, but on the other hand, you have the Genesis in some cases genuinely improving on it. I'd give the Genesis the slight edge here, but we can't talk sound without talking about sound effects, which is where the Super NES absolutely kicks the Genesis in the teeth. The Genesis game is missing a ton of sound effects like grunts during battle, the crowd reaction sounds, and a metric ton of voiceovers. It's seriously not even close. There are large portions of the Genesis game where there are no sound effects at all. You can go for chunks of matches with hits not even making any sound, which honestly damages the overall game feel considerably, but we'll get to more on that in a bit. The music might have a slight edge, might even have a big edge, but the effects on the Super NES are light years beyond. The point, once again, goes to Super NES. Okay, now here I think we have a pretty solid victory for the Genesis game, but I do think there are a few points worth exploring. First and foremost, both of these games are censored. The Genesis game is the only one with a blood code, though, which then restores everything in its ultra-violent glory. That's all the red blood and the arcade fatalities. Now, if we're judging based on the censored versions, I think the Super NES would win outright. It at least tries to be somewhat creative in its non-gory fatalities, where the Genesis game just relies on giving characters a big ol' uppercut. But once you enter that blood code, it's a whole new ballgame. Johnny Cage is supposed to punch his opponent's head off, but on the Super NES, he sticks his foot in his chest. It's weird. Kano is supposed to rip your heart out of your chest, but on the Super NES, he does that, but it's gray? It makes absolutely no sense. Liu Kang does a cute little cartwheel and punches you really hard. This is the same in both versions, and it's dumb no matter what. Scorpion and Sonya both burn their victims into skeletons, which is the same in both versions, but I think looks way better on the Super NES thanks to the superior animations and color palette. Raiden and Sub-Zero are where things get a little more interesting. Raiden is supposed to zap you until your head explodes, which looks great on Genesis. But on Super NES, he zaps you until you turn into dust and a skull, which, if I'm being honest, I legitimately like better. That said, I can't fault the Genesis for sticking with the source material. Sub-Zero is the clincher, though. This is the iconic fatality from Mortal Kombat. He rips your head and spinal cord out. It's there on Genesis, but replaced by something else on Super NES. He freezes you, then shatters your frozen body. It's a move that was officially included in Mortal Kombat 2 and makes a ton of sense given the character's abilities. It also looks great, and I love it. But no matter how cool it is, it's not the iconic head rip. The Super NES game did an admirable job here, but at the end of the day, the blood is such a huge part of Mortal Kombat's identity, and sweat just doesn't cut it. Shattering a frozen body rules, but it's no replacement for the pure shock value of ripping someone's spinal cord out. Super NES gets an A for effort, but the Genesis gets the point. Ah, the gameplay, the all-important gameplay category. This is what it all comes down to. If the Genesis can pull off this one, it pulls ahead of Super NES. If Super NES gets this one, that's the end of that. And this is a close category. In terms of first impressions, the Genesis game seems to have the slight advantage thanks to the gameplay being a little more quick and responsive. Your characters react to inputs instantly, and everything moves along great, even if it's at a slightly faster clip than the arcade original. It's nice, especially compared to the Super NES game's slightly more sluggish movements. Everything there's got a bit of a delay on it. It's not bad at all and it is perfectly playable, but there are certain times where you'll think you pressed a button and the command will happen just a bit later than it should. Of course, you have to take into consideration the controller as well, which for fighting games, the Super NES wins hands down. The Genesis's 3-button controller works well enough, but the Super NES is always ready with 6 buttons, which makes it the superior experience. Yes, the Genesis 6-button controller exists, but at this point, it wasn't the standard yet, the 3-button was, so I've got to count it as a minor point against it. This would, I think, make this one a tie if it weren't for the sound factor. My biggest issue with the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat is its lack of impact. Nothing hits in this game. When you land an uppercut on Genesis, the screen shakes and the guy goes flying, but it still somehow feels like nothing. In the Super Nintendo game, you hear this super hard thwap, you hear the audience react, and you hear the huge thud when they land.
Sonya wins.
It's like this for everything. The music changes when you perform a fatality. Raiden screams when he flies at you. Fireballs crackle when they land. It all has impact. The Genesis game may have all the blood and violence, but somehow the Super NES game feels more violent to play, which is weird, but even playing them back to back now, it's as clear as day. One is far more visceral than the other. That said, blood is blood, and as great as Impact is, it doesn't mean as much as it should without the red stuff. So, yeah, this one's a tie. Look, I get it. Mortal Kombat isn't Mortal Kombat without blood, which is what made this so close, but at the end of the day, those fatalities are really all the Genesis game has over its Super NES counterpart. That's a big deal for sure, but it's not enough to make it a better game. The Genesis game is ugly, animates poorly, and feels cheap by comparison. The Genesis would correct a lot of these issues for the sequel, but that's a story for another time. For now, we're just talking Mortal Kombat 1, and while the Genesis game had the blood and subsequent sales numbers, the Super NES game is a better experience all around, if only by a hair. The winner is Super NES.
Well, there you have it, folks. I have declared that Mortal Kombat 1 for Super Nintendo is the better game between this one and the Genesis one. I know, that's a controversial pick. I know this doesn't have the blood, but I think I backed it up with some pretty solid evidence. And when it really comes down to playing this game, when it feels like to play Mortal Kombat, that actual sensation besides the blood, I think this one nails it a lot better. But the Genesis version is still pretty great. It's still Mortal Kombat. It's still an absolute classic. I love Mortal Kombat, and I'm really excited to play this new Mortal Kombat collection that's coming out. I don't know when this video is going to come out. I know it's coming out real soon, but I cannot wait to wrap my hands around it. I love classic Mortal Kombat, and that's it. That's all I got. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw here today, please follow, comment, like, subscribe, share, and let me know down in the comments exactly how wrong I am, because I know this is not a popular opinion that this one is better than the Genesis one. This one had the blood. If Mortal Kombat Nitro was a thing, like a real thing that got finished and was released, I feel like we'd be having a very different conversation, but I digress. Thanks again. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.